Welcome back. I'm Sean Noble.
I'm Chris Clements.
Today we are highly honored to have with us the venerable Bob Robb. Robert
Royalty.
Rob. The media royalty.
Media royalty.
What's interesting, Bob? So Bob is for our listeners who may not know, which I would find amazing, is an
if you like politics in the state of Arizona, you have to know.
Bob's an opinion writer at the Arizona Republic, and you've been there now
over 20 years.
Yeah, now what a lot of people listening may not know is that Bob Robb, before he was a columnist for the Republic,
had a dark past.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call it dark, but he was the top political consultant, PR guy in town.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an idol.
Is that a
for
deep,
me.
Dark secret?
I don't
you
think
don't
it's a
want
secret.
anybody to know that.
No, it's just very old history.
Who were some of your clients?
Well, he was one of the guys that was early with John Kyle when John Kyle ran for Congress the first time.
Yeah, I handled professionally John's reelection campaigns. I served as the volunteer general chairman when he ran for U.S. Senate, but was very close and involved in his political activities for a very long time, and he's a very good and dear friend.
Yeah. You don't have many John Kyles anymore.
Or maybe it's just me, would say that he's Arizona's greatest senator. I believe that.
Probably the most effective.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by
that. That the state has ever had, and embodied the state in a way that I don't think others did. He had sort of a Reagan-esque broad appeal in very un-Reagan-esque manners. Reagan did it mostly on personality. With John, even people who disagreed with him believed that he was very well informed, perhaps knew more about the subject than
anybody else.
Than anyone else did,
for sure.
and was motivated by doing what he thought was right for the country and the state.
Well, when you think about, I mean, when we had John Shattuck on the podcast, we talked about how Arizona definitely punches above its weight when it comes to our historical.
It used to punch above its weight,
not as much,
very substantially above its rate, and John Shattuck was a great example of that.
Yeah, I would agree, having worked for him. But John Kyle, when you think about the influence Arizona has had on the national political and policy realm, Arizona had a sitting, our senior senator in 1952, Ernest McFarland, was the Senate president, who was then defeated by Goldwater. But Carl Hayden was an institution for decades. Obviously, Goldwater was a huge personality and a huge force. John McCain replacing him was DeConcini, not as much of a huge force, but we've talked about how he was a master at the constituent services and that kind of thing.
Well, and the art of the deal.
Yeah.
In the U.S. Senate, and you had John Rhodes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then
and then somebody like Mo Udall.
Right. And then Kyle comes along and serves, 3 terms in the House? 86 to 88, 3 or 4. And then comes to the Senate, and then doesn't take too long for him to get into leadership. And then he was the majority whip, or minority whip, I guess, at the time, when McConnell was the leader. And there's a lot of people who credit Kyle for how effective McConnell has been.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Because Kyle was able to,
Well, but
work closely behind the scenes. I mean, I saw that firsthand, 2009, 2010, when we were battling the healthcare issue after Obama got elected. Kyle was just a master. I'd meet with him, and he would have insights and knowledge about things and the ability to shape things were just astounding. I mean, it was just amazing to watch. You're right. He knew more about anything than anyone else in the room.
Yep.
So,
Which
so
is-
that goes
which
to your
might be a
history.
far cry from what we have right now.
One could argue.
What
the
do
point.
we have right now, Bob?
Well, I do.
How would you assess our current situation?
I think Kirsten Sinema is a very skilled politician and fits within the DeConcini mode. She understands the art of the deal. I'm now inclined to believe that her commitment to bipartisanship is sincere, that it's not an act, as Republicans have claimed unsuccessfully in
Well, I
election
did
after
early on.
election
I was a part of that.
against her. But she's caught in the squeeze between how woke the Democratic Party has become and how uninterested in compromise, to a very large extent, the Republican Party has become. But I think that she is a person of talent and someone within the DeConcini mode. We just don't have that kind of leadership that we had historically in our House delegation on either side. I would say that Raul Grijalva is a thought leader on the woke left and has been and has the courage of his convictions. Beyond that, it's a pretty mediocre cast of characters. And I don't think we know yet about Mark Kelly. I think he has potential, but so far he's been afraid of his own political shadow. And that's not what leaders
Where
do.
is Mark Kelly? Do
Yeah.
you know where he is?
Like we said, maybe outer space. I have commented to people a lot, and maybe even said on the podcast. It strikes me as a little bit bizarre, and maybe it's politically tone deaf, that he's not hugging as close to Kirsten Sinema as he possibly can. Is that because he just doesn't trust her, or he doesn't think the same way, or he just doesn't recognize that that's the best political move he could make going into re-election?
Maybe he still owes her royalties for stealing her campaign playbook in the last election. A little afraid of paying up. I think it's him being afraid of his own political shadow. I mean, he does cling close to her in terms of what he projects as his brand to the Arizona electorate, and you will see lots of joint press releases and anything coming from Sinema says bipartisanship, 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 and he signs on to that. But she became a highly controversial figure within the Democratic Party. And I just think he's trying to steer away from any political controversy until he's back up and safely beyond re-election this time around.
I was surprised. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I figured where she was on the filibuster, he was going to follow. So when he announced that he was willing to blow it up, in my mind, that sets him apart from her in a negative way, I think, with most voters. Obviously, it was what the left wanted. But given that he didn't have there was no threat of a primary that we were aware of, it seems that could come back to haunt him.
Well, I have become persuaded that Sinema's commitment to bipartisanship is deep and sincere. And the slings and arrows that she took and the political hits that she's taken on behalf of the filibuster, when there were convenient ways out, the talking filibuster being the prime example. Kelly has given no indication that the bipartisanship and working in a consensus manner towards the center that he projected to Arizona voters last election is deeply held and sincere. He seems to want to move into the slipstream of wherever the Democratic Party is, while maintaining perhaps the facade here in Arizona that he's like Sinema. He's bipartisan. He's nonpartisan. He hasn't, unlike Sinema, he's not put any evidence that would demonstrate his commitment to that governing philosophy. She did it pretty well cost-free when she was in the House, but pretty consistently, particularly on business issues. She's done it under the most intense political heat a U.S. Senator can receive in the Senate, being in the majority. There's nothing you can point to in his record where he's taken risks against the left in order to advance that philosophy.
Well,
Well, that assumes that he has a governing philosophy, that he has some deep-seated principles, and I think to your point, he hasn't really shown that. And I mean, you contrast that with somebody like a John Kyle. I mean, no matter what you thought of John Kyle or agreed or disagreed with him, he had a set of governing principles, conservative principles that he stood by, and you knew where he stood on any given issue because of that.
You know, my guess is that Kelly, at heart, is more of a pragmatic problem solver, but hasn't figured out how to be that and survive where we are politically, which isn't leaving a lot of room in either party for people who are pragmatic problem solvers. And so I think, as I have said a couple times, I just think he's afraid of his political shadow, and he's trying to duck underneath the radar and again run on Sinema's playbook in hopes that gets him 6 years and perhaps an atmosphere that would be more suitable to what I suspect, but we do not have any evidence, is what is at his root, which isn't ideological. It's more pragmatic problem solving.
Well, we've made a running joke on the show of where is Mark Kelly? We aren't necessarily referring to where is he physically, where is he mentally, philosophically, emotionally, because he doesn't seem to show any of that.
No, he's trying to continue to be a blank slate. I'm an astronaut with a compelling personal story and a tragic but compelling story with respect to my spouse, and I'm like Kirsten Sinema, nonpartisan, and that's the only profile he wants.
And do you think that's an effective strategy going forward into what should be a pretty contentious, spring and fall?
I do not know where we're headed politically. This is obviously shaping up as a huge Republican year, but Republicans seem committed to booting the opportunity.
We talked about that last week.
So if it is Mark Kelly running as Mark Kelly did 2 years ago, and it's against another Trumpian candidate who wants to relitigate the 2020 election, and Kelly, as it appears to be the case, has more money than you can usefully deploy in a political campaign, I think he's got a chance. He ought not to have a chance.
Sure. This is the kind of year he shouldn't need.
This should be a slam dunk for a Republican U.S. Senate candidate. And what's really puzzling is that Youngkin in Virginia demonstrated how you walk this tightrope of Republican politics today. You don't be anti-Trump, but you don't be a Trumpian. You create your own independent political brand and your own set of issues, and you run on those. And there's not a single Republican candidate running for U.S. Senate or governor following the Youngkin formula. They all are running as Trumpians, and that's been repudiated in the last election, and he didn't do all that well in Arizona in 2016. He won the state by 6 percentage points less than Mitt Romney against a far inferior opponent. And the state didn't change that much between 2012 and 2016. The explanation is Donald Trump doesn't wear well in Arizona. And we have every Republican candidate for major office running in the Trump primary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which makes it very difficult to try to, you know,
So
prognosticate this.
how would you assess the Republican field for the U.S. Senate at this point? I mean, in terms of
It is pathetic.
don't mince words, Bob. Tell us what you really think.
They are all auditioning for a Trump endorsement and to appeal to that segment of the Republican electorate that has become personally loyal to a man rather than loyal to issues as the populist right in the Republican Party historically has been. That's been the big transformation.
Yeah.
It was always about a third of the Republican electorate were more populist right than small government, libertarian-oriented conservatives. They have become a majority of the Republican primary electorate, and they've become loyal to a man rather than a cause. As Sean will know, it used to be that if you deviated on the issue, it didn't matter what your track record was or how long the track record was. They turned on you.
Yeah, they'd whack you upside the head.
And now Trump has become a symbol.
Yeah, it's a cult of personality more than
and it's
governing
not
philosophy.
a winning general election formula in Arizona. We've proven that, and all of them are headed down that route.
Yeah, that's disappointing. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. What, going bigger picture, global, how do you see, I mean, is there an end game on what Putin is trying to do? You know, is he lost his mind? I mean, you've watched the world for many years in the prism of policy and political orientation. Where do we go? I mean, how did we get here, and what's your sense on how we get out of this?
I don't know what the end game is, but it has been a historical turning point. Putin has succeeded in uniting Europe and causing Europe to be willing to do serious things to promote its own security interests. And that's been a problem that has bedeviled American foreign policy for a very long period of time. The ostracization of Russia as a country is something that would never have been predicted before this occurred and is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. At some point, the question has to occur to people, well, what about China? Mm-hmm. That's the other, that's the authoritarian Bigfoot. And it's going to be hard to justify, for instance, our universities deciding we're going to have nothing to do with Russia while they're deeply involved in a variety of ways in China.
Right.
Well, that raises the question, what about China? So I think you've had a revival of the sense of fragility and the necessity to work together within democratic capitalist countries. And that's what Putin feared and didn't face. And now, by his invasion of Ukraine, has actually created and coalesced. The fortitude and courage of the Ukrainian people is astonishing. And the fact that they have stalled a massive invasion of their country is so inspiring and humbling. At some point, the internal pressures within Russia, I hope, will cause an end game to be in sight. The terrifying prospect is that it's hard to see an end game that doesn't involve Putin losing power. And that creates instability and uncertainty in a country that has 1,500 nuclear weapons.
Right.
So I can't be optimistic about how this is resolved, but I'm incredibly encouraged at the unity that it has caused within Europe and among democratic capitalist countries as a whole across the world. We have been reminded by the Ukrainian people of how precious and how fragile the freedoms that we enjoy are, and the need to take seriously and in a united fashion the threats against them.
Yeah, it it has been a remarkable few weeks, that is for certain, and something that it is interesting how quickly, as you mentioned, the speed at which there was a coalition against Russia, I think must have surprised Putin. I think he figured he could bully his way into this, and with almost no consequence.
I credit the leadership and the people of Ukraine 100% for that. If he had succeeded in just wiping out the leadership, putting in place a puppet government, my guess is that the reaction of Europe would have been pretty feckless.
Yeah.
It is the fact that they were able to stave off a quick victory by the Russian troops, and the remarkable leadership and courage and willingness to fight for their national sovereignty and the values that they hope to share with us, both gave space for a consensus to develop and a inspiration, as well as a seriousness of purpose, allowed that to form. So I believe that their example and their success in staving off a quick victory is what created the conditions under which Europe came together.
Right.
And in what I now truly believe, I wrote early on that this is potentially a historical turning point. I'm now persuaded that it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And as you point out, the China issue is really, really concerning because, they want Taiwan.
Well, and this was a time for choosing, and they chose.
Yeah.
They sided with Russia against the entire world.
Well, and they're watching what we're doing. They're watching how almost everything we do in Ukraine and Russia right now, in terms of how we aid them and how Europe reacts. So hopefully they're taking stock in that.
Hopefully they are, and more important than China taking stock is for the people of Taiwan to take stock.
Sure.
They have been lax in providing for their own security interests and beefing up their commitment and their capability to fight. I think that this has awoken the people of Taiwan not only to what's at stake, but the ability of a committed small country to fend off an invasion by a larger force. And in reality, although China is a larger force, it's still a conscript force, and that's been part of the problem that Putin has had in Russia. And it requires an amphibious invasion, which is more difficult than a land invasion. So this should both give the Taiwanese a reason to commit. I've often thought Taiwan needs to become the Israel of the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
That's an interesting place.
It gives them, at least to be the Ukrainians of the Indo-Pacific. And there are indications that it's having that effect. So I actually think that the larger lesson needs to be learned by the Taiwanese. China's going to do what it's going to do. She, like Putin, may feel that time is running out at some point in time. He's made it clear that the incorporation of Taiwan is something he wants to achieve. He has said that it can't wait forever. As with Putin, he's going to make his decision. The Taiwanese can make it significantly more costly and less likely to be successful.
Do you think it's instructive that one of the Chinese foreign ministers the other day made a comment of, don't be careful not to form a NATO of the Pacific with Japan and Australia and other nations in the region?
Well, they believe that we've already effectively done that. It's not as formalized as NATO, but one of the objectives of the Chinese is to replace the United States as the predominant Pacific power. What more we can do is not obvious. The key is for Japan and Australia and South Korea to do more. And there are indications that that's occurring. The problem with a informal NATO in the Indo-Pacific is the enmity between South Korea and Japan.
Sure.
Right.
And U.S. diplomacy has insufficiently prioritized trying to get those two countries beyond that, and which is necessary for any kind of regional defense cooperation. We have beefed up our alliance with Australia by giving them nuclear power submarines, or the prospect of that in the future, which is very much a defensive increased capability for Australia in those areas. The problem for China will be if Europe, in its new sense of unity, takes a different view of China as well as of Russia, who sees, if Europe begins to see the world as being engaged in a struggle, call it a new Cold War if you want, between authoritarianism and democratic capitalism, then that has implications for China. And will have the potential of more economically isolating China and accelerating the movement towards de-engaging with the Chinese. There is so much greater interaction between relationships between the economies of the West and China than there were with Russia. That's a far more complicated endeavor. But China's been, I think, severely hurt by the Russian invasion and its decision to stand by it. They profess neutrality, but they are parroting every claim that Putin makes, and has sort of created a dividing line in the world.
Yeah.
See why I woke up all depressed this
Yeah,
morning?
I get it. I get it.
I mean, it's a
a
lot.
lot to grapple with.
But the source of optimism is what's occurred in Europe. That's new, that's big, that's important. However, Ukraine ends up being resolved. It's a source of optimism going forward. The world has been awakened by this.
Yeah.
Well, it's a source of not just optimism, but finally Europe understanding the realism of Russian aggression, which has been there for the better part of 22 years. We talked about this before. And how do we go to Germany and say, you need to spend more than, you need to fulfill your commitment to NATO. France, you need to fulfill your commitment to NATO. All of a sudden, they're going to fulfill their commitment to NATO and maybe even look for alternative fuel sources rather than buying Russian oil.
Well, if Europe,
I mean, there's always a tipping point, obviously, and this is it.
and if Europe succeeds in reducing Russian imports by 2/3 this year, which is what the European Union has committed to, that is a remarkable sea change.
Crushing blow to Russia.
That numbers Putin's day, irrespective of how Ukraine is ultimately resolved.
Yeah.
But then the other concern is, are we then importing more oil from Iran, Iraq, Venezuela? I mean, that's the latest and greatest, and that's even more concerning.
It is, and
up until 2020, this country was energy independent. Now we're going around the world saying, no, you need to produce more oil, and the Saudis won't even take our phone calls. Apparently, it's crazy.
Yeah, the approach of the Biden administration to managing that part of the equation. I give the Biden administration credit for neither getting too far ahead nor too far behind the developing consensus in Europe. It was important that occur organically within Europe. That makes it enduring. That's not following America's lead.
Right.
And so I give the Biden administration a lot of credit for diplomacy in this part of this crisis. The energy policy is just brain dead.
Yeah.
Just brain dead. It doesn't matter how committed you are to fighting climate change over time. It's clear we need to turn the faucets on right now. If Europe is going to wean itself from natural gas from Russia, liquefied natural gas from the United States, from fracking and U.S. Domestic production, is the key to that.
Right.
Is the key to that. And natural gas is so much cleaner than coal and oil. You are making significant strides in climate change. So the antagonism towards natural gas by this administration is a serious, serious problem. It was a problem domestically. It's now become a problem in terms of managing this crisis.
Right.
Yeah, it seems that they're so set on their ideology in terms of the Green New Deal and what that could mean for, their left constituency, that they're forgetting what's important for national security.
Well, and when you have
global security,
when
for
you
that
have
matter.
Elon Musk, Mr. Green Energy, saying we got to drill here now.
Yeah, but even Elon Musk understands that you can't power electric cars with wind and solar. He intuitively understands that natural gas powering power plants is a good thing.
Well, there's got to be a base.
And that it's going to take many, many years before the majority of the population can afford, an $80,000 or $50,000 electric car. That's just the reality. And now most people can't even afford the gas to put in the car that they have. So it's a huge issue.
Just broke the record on
that we've created, that the Biden administration has created from the moment they got into office, I would argue.
Well, and if you look at the graph, I mean, the gas prices were skyrocketing before the Ukraine crisis.
Of course.
So that obviously will add to it, but it wasn't the root cause.
Well, it's not because of Russia. Yeah,
No.
that gas prices are exploding.
What? How do you see? So set aside, and it's hard to, I think, anticipate what the Biden administration looks like for the next 2.5 years, because there is so much of the international.
Do we have
issue.
that long?
Will he be around in 2
Do we
years?
have that long? I mean, I'm reading a headline. Kamala Harris is in Europe, and she doesn't even know where she is right now. Well, she says Poland is in the northern flank of NATO.
This is the same woman who went on radio and said, Russia is a big country, and Ukraine is a little country, and the big country invaded the little country, and that's wrong. I mean, that's I don't know if you saw that.
I did not.
It is I think when as a political guy for years, you tell the candidates and politicians, speak at about a third grade level, right? So I think
we need to remember this is Montel Williams' ex-girlfriend.
Well,
I mean, we can just put it all in perspective.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we need to remember.
But I think she heard when they said third grade. I think she heard 3 years old.
Okay. I don't know.
I don't know. She's been underwhelming. But you have watched presidents closely for decades. How do you wrote about Biden's State of the Union, pointed out that his discussion about inflation was just completely unhinged in the sense that everything he talked about was just actually going to make the problem worse. Is he performing as president as you may have thought he would when he was running for president?
He has. Biden has never had a philosophical core. He has always positioned himself wherever the mainstream of the Democratic Party has been. So when the mainstream of the Democratic Party, when Clinton was president, said, Democrats need to be tough on crime, he crafted a tough on crime bill. When the mainstream of the Democratic Party decided, well, no, the cops are the problem, we need to defund them, he echoed those kind of sentiments. And the mainstream of the Republican Party is Elizabeth Warren right now.
Democratic Party. Right?
Democratic
The
Party.
Democratic Party.
Don't lump the Elizabeth Warren.
And he had a radical program agenda. He didn't run on it. He ran as a return to normalcy. But he created common ground with Bernie Sanders for the official Democratic platform. So given that he's never been someone who led, he was always someone who found the middle and tried to stay comfortable there. I mean, I think he's got general liberal instincts. Government should do more for particularly the less fortunate. But beyond that, he's just always been kind of wherever the center of his party was. And the center of his party is extremely progressive.
It's amazing how much it's changed.
And what was astonishing is that he doubled down on a failed agenda in the State of the Union address.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sort of saying, okay, Manchin and Sinema, get out of the way. And we've already played that movie. It doesn't turn out well for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it certainly won't turn out well, I don't think. I mean, as we've talked about this before, and you mentioned it earlier, that Republicans have a knack of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And I fear that there will be some of that. But I also believe that the red wave is going to be big enough that even some of our idiotic candidates are going to get swept into office. Now, 2024 may be a little bit of a reset, but it'll be very interesting to see what the presidential situation looks like.
But you can even see that today with the passage of this $1.5 trillion budget.
The omnibus.
The omnibus, as they're calling it, and the embracing of pork and of
earmarks are back.
Earmarks are back, and people like Roy Blunt and Senator Shelby of Alabama embracing, what was long thought dead, and part of the Republican or conservative mantra that we're against earmarks, we're against enriching, ourselves politically and bringing back the bacon.
Yeah,
and they've totally blown that up.
Boy, the earmark issue just brings me back to the Shattuck days when it was Blunt and Shattuck and Boehner running for minority leader, and Shattuck really didn't have a chance. But his being in the race for minority leader, which Blunt was supposed to win. He was the minority whip at the time. Blunt was the odds-on favorite. Boehner figured out that with Shattuck in the race, if he did a second ballot strategy, he might be able to pull this thing off. And that's exactly what happened. Boehner was, and as much crap as Boehner gets from the base, he was one of the early adopters of no earmarks. I mean, he never did an earmark when he was in Congress, nor did Shattuck. Blunt did a lot.
Yeah.
Bob, I wanted to go back to, you were a successful entrepreneur, business guy, consultant, PR whiz, and then you decided to be a columnist. How did that happen? And you stepped away from what could have, it was probably a pretty decent career, but you had lots of opportunities facing you. And in some ways, when you step back to be a columnist, I thought to myself, man, there's a guy who's actually taking one for the team in the sense of he could make a lot more money not being a columnist.
Sure.
But he's going to go and be a voice in a space that desperately needs it. So I view what you did as a sacrifice. I don't know if you think that, but what was going through your mind on that decision?
When it was clear that my predecessor, John Colby, wasn't going to make it, he had a cancer that he was not going to be able to overcome, Kevin and Willie recruited me. And I had the very odd experience at mid-age, I was in my 40s, of deciding whether what I thought I wanted to do when I graduated from college, which was being a columnist, was still what I wanted to do. And I concluded that it would be a mistake to not at least give it a try. I figured that if it didn't work out, I could always go back to the consultancy. In reality, that coincided with kind of the digital revolution. And in terms of my previous career, I quickly became outdated and a dinosaur. But it has been what I think I'm best at and most enjoy. And I was thrifty, or as some may describe it, cheap. So there really wasn't that much of a financial sacrifice. I had already provided for my family and my kids and all the money that I would need, prudently invested. So it continues to be what I think I'm best at and most enjoy doing.
Well, and I mean, you have been at it. It's just astounding to me that long it's been. And I mean, you, in my mind, especially since Colby's passing, you've been the voice of reason down there at the Republic. I feel like the paper's different than it was when you started there, and not for the better, for the most part. But thank God you're there.
Well, and that was part of the recruitment. I think Kevin wanted to move the paper at that point from a conservative to more of a centrist position. One could argue that it's drifted well beyond that, but she wanted a strong conservative voice. And Colby was master of discussing the inside political game. That's not my forte. I'm more of the issues and in policy and a little bit on the political side. I do think the fact that I was engaged in the battle has given me insight and perspective that's useful. I sort of reversed engineered the ordinary path, which is to do the newspaper gig and then go into consulting. And having been in behind the closed doors where the decisions are made and the calculations are made, having been involved in high-profile political campaigns, I think gives me and insight that's often missing from people from my profession. I know what it's like to make those decisions, both indirectly in terms of being an advisor and knowing very well the people who are making the decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely served you in your career as a columnist. I didn't know that was what you aspired to as a college student.
Well, in high school, I discovered Bill Buckley and became.
Imagine that.
And,
Son, what exactly is this that you're reading? Well, Dad.
And I edited my student newspaper. I wrote a column for 4 years. But when I graduated from college, they don't give jobs like I currently have to people just graduating from
And
college.
you were Occidental, right?
Occidental College in Los Angeles.
Jack Kent.
It's a big one.
And the jobs that were potentially available in journalism. I was never a good reporter, even though I did some reporting, including interning with the Los Angeles Times. But the jobs that were available, this was the only kind of job in journalism that I was interested in.
You want to get into sports columnists or anything like that?
No. Although the temptation is sometimes great.
Cover the Lakers.
So I had opportunities in the other direction that led me in the paths that we have discussed, which is why. But being a column writer is what always was what I thought I most wanted to do and would be best at. So as I said, it was interesting in my 40s to have presented to me a opportunity to do what I thought I wanted to do in my 20s.
Bob got to live the life that I wanted to, in the sense that, remember, I was a broadcasting major.
Sure.
Thought I was going to be on TV.
Well,
And then
you have a
dabbled in
face for TV.
No, I have a
maybe not
face for
voice.
radio, is what they said. But I was I was dabbling in politics as a college student, and then when it came time, I didn't get. The only offer I got was Bismarck, North Dakota, for less money than I was making at the time. John Shadegg had been elected to Congress, and I was working in his district office. I was making more money there than I would as a reporter in Bismarck. But I don't think there's any chance I'm getting on TV. At this age.
You need to take the podcast to the big screen.
Well, it is viewable, but
Well, there is video.
I don't think so. I mean, I'll do an occasional Fox appearance or cable news, but I don't think I'll be reading the news anytime soon or ever.
Yeah.
So you have, I get to, in some ways, live vicariously through your
Bob,
success.
I wanted to ask you in terms of how news has changed. I mean, there's a criticism of the Fourth Estate that there really isn't hard news anymore. It's just opinion. It's just perspective and opinion. I mean, how do you distinguish yourself as a columnist, as a conservative, as philosophically, someone of the Bill Buckley age, and with all the noise, and from what was a center-right publication that everybody respected to now has gone more left, and you could argue that conservative voices aren't heard as much within the sphere of the Republic anymore.
I don't believe that there isn't objective journalism going on, but with the fractionalization that's occurred within the media, it is much more difficult to find. And there's no question that a lot of the traditional sources of that now have an ideological coloration, both in the topics that they choose to write on and how they choose to write about them. So I'm not sure that there's any way to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Sure.
With the digital revolution, I think a fractionalization of the media was inevitable. I think we are beginning to see that aspect or that sphere of the media evolve, and so you've got you've got Substack contributions such as the Dispatch, which is from a center-right perspective, but is interested in and committed to the truth. It's not a matter too much of, particularly in my profession, opinion writing. People have become cheerleaders for a particular side. And if you go back to when I was growing up, on both the left and the right, the prominent opinion columnists weren't cheerleaders for any particular party. You had Bill Buckley and James Jackson Kilpatrick on the right. You had Scotty Reston, Tom Wicker on the left. You had the Alsop brothers kind of in the center. But they would call foul on their own side.
Yep.
You just don't see that much anymore. And I think there's a greater obligation on the part of readers and listeners to search out for diverse voices. I don't think the answer is to expect the media to reform itself. It's a matter of sorting through what's out there and not getting caught in only listening to your own echo chamber. And there are on both the left and the right. I'm a big fan of think tanks, and I rely upon their work a lot. And so there are think tanks on the right, American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute from a libertarian standpoint, that I have confidence isn't going to try to shade the information or hide inconvenient facts. There are those on the left as well. The Center for Policy and Budget Priorities is a very liberal group whose research I actually have confidence in. I do not think they're going to cut corners. Now, there are think tanks on the left and think tanks on the right that do cut corners. And so I think that getting us to a position where we can have discussions rather than just yell at each other is going to require a reform of the way that we elect our political leaders, to de-emphasize the role that party primaries play in that decision-making process, and a greater sense of, a greater ethic of the voters to search for more diverse information sources and reward those that agree with your point of view, but have a commitment to the truth as well.
Yeah.
They are out there.
Well, and I think that you nailed it. I think that this is the media is giving us what we want.
Sure.
And it's incumbent upon us as citizens to say we need to have a diversity of thought. We need to, as you say, point out, call the fouls. And you've taken criticism from elected officials when that are on your side, so to speak, when you've called out the bullshit. And that's admirable. But I know that you take the slings and arrows, and that probably happens on a fairly regular basis.
It does, and people assume that because I'm the most conservative writer for the Republic, that I am the carrier of water for that cause. And that's not what I see my role as. I see my role as providing thoughtful commentary and observations about public policy and politics, and letting the chips fall where they may.
Yep.
Even though I get a lot of that, it doesn't bother me. It's background noise.
Yeah. That's good.
You had a recent column where you took the governor to task on his
Did I?
water. I was like, I wonder what type of blowback you got on that one. And you know what? You were absolutely correct. That the column was actually enlightened me on some issues that I did not know about.
Well, I mean, it's
because I just wasn't following it.
We came up as an agricultural state. We're shifting. The water policy is not keeping up with the changing of the state. That's kind of, in my mind, the simplest. Now, But it's a tough issue because, as they say, you go in any of those old bowls, water buffaloes, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Yeah, that is
So-
true.
Well, I believe that there's ways to make the voluntary transformation from agricultural use of water to more of an urban use of water, and there's dramatic per capita usage reductions that are achieved when that's done. And there is so much we can do on conservation and so much we can do on water markets to say, guess what, we got a whole bunch of money, let's throw $1 billion of it towards a desalinization scheme that in itself makes no sense to me, even if it was much less expensive. Because so the problem is the Colorado River is declining.
Sure.
So the solution is to build a desalinization plant in Mexico, not to produce water for Arizona, but in order to induce Mexico to give up its share of the declining resource, the Colorado River. So it would be Arizona spending $1 billion to double down on what's currently causing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you also made a great point in the article about how many untapped underground resources we have in the state, and how if you look at all those, we have plenty of water, and we just need to manage it appropriately. And that's been the argument down where I'm from Tucson, for many years. There's plenty of water here. We just need to manage it more properly and not keep signing away our water rights to everybody else.
Well, and Pima County has done far more on conservation and reducing per capita water use than we have here in Maricopa County. We have for many years, even though we're now worried about shortages on the Colorado River, we've had surpluses. And we have banked that. We have injected that into the ground. And when you consider that resource, as well as a substantially reduced flow of surface water, we have enough water to meet our needs for decades. So in my judgment, it's way premature to be making billion-dollar decisions, particularly for things that, in my judgment, don't make sense.
Counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. No, I thought it was a great column.
Well, Bob, it's been an honor to have you here.
We're over time.
Wait,
I got more questions.
It flew by. We're going to have him back.
Let's talk about Wendy Rogers. Can we do that?
I think time is over.
Yeah, time's up. Well, we've got January 6th. We got Wendy.
I had a great Wendy Rogers, Kirsten Cinema story that I wanted to tell, but maybe next time.
We'll do it next time. But we appreciate it, and hopefully you'll come back.
Happy to.
We appreciate your time, and you subscribe to the Republic if only to read. That's the only reason I do, is to read Bob Robb.
You don't just subscribe to read E.J. Montini?
No, I don't even subscribe.
Because I usually read him and
you read him and then email me about how pissed off you are.
No, I usually email him and tell him how wrong he is, and then I move on.
Yeah. So I'll read Lori every now and then, just because she and I are frenemies.
And she's been on the program, and she was lovely. She did not call you the Prince of Darkness.
Well, I think she called me the Dark Money Maestro, but whatever. I embrace it, obviously. So thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thanks,
for being
Bob.
here.
Happy to be here.
All right, thanks, guys.
God
Have
bless.
a great one.